Let's be honest, there does come a time when it's too late to start planning for retirement, or at the very least, less optimal. In this video, I'm going to try and pinpoint when that might be so that you can start to take action sooner rather than later. We can't begin to answer this question without digging into some of the theory that sits around retirement planning. In particular, we need to start talking about time. And time is one of those things that is relative to each and every single person. We all have time, but some have more time than others. And I put it on this axis right here because the present, which is now, is relative to each of us. But what we do know is that we're working towards a future date for retirement. And that number will be different for everyone. For some people, it might be 66, which is the current state pension age for males and females. It will be increasing in the years to come. As we're recording this, it's 66 years old. And when you plot it against this axis here, which is the success axis, what we know is that depending on when you're starting, the more time you have, the more chance of success you have, which is plotted right here. And the idea is that, if your present is further along this line, so maybe here, you have less time and therefore you have a diminishing chance of success to retire at a point in time in the future, possibly with adequate resources to fund you. We also have to talk about pension contribution rates because this is a key part of the strategy that has to work alongside your timeline, i.e. how long you have between now and retirement, to ensure that you give yourself the best chance of success so that you can retire comfortably. And I'm aware that comfortable and that term is going to be relative and subjective depending on where you are on your journey right now. But there is a rule of thumb based on your age, a calculation that dictates how much you should be paid into your retirement part, your retirement planning strategies, in order for you to give yourself the best chance of success. And as I go through this formula with you in a moment, the eagle-eyed of you will probably spot that there is immediately a problem. And if you do, pop it in the comments because it's going to form another part of the conversation we're going to explore in this video. So this is the rule of thumb. Come and take a look at this. So in terms of your pension contribution rates, the rule of thumb dictates that you take your age, you divide it by 2, and whatever the resulting number is the contribution rate into your pension. So I've got a couple of examples here. So if you're 20, you divide that by 2 means you've got a 10% contribution rate. If you're 30, you've got a 15% contribution rate. If you're 45 years old, then your contribution rate is 22.5%. Now, in some circles, they will say that you need to give yourself a little bit of a buffer. So actually up your contribution rate so that if anything were to happen, you have a little bit of leeway. And typically, they advocate for an additional 5%. So if you're in your 20s, 15%. If you're in your 30s, 20%. If you're 45 years old, then it's actually 27.5%. Let's just add another one on here, just as an example. If you're 50 years old, you divide that by 2, which gives you a 25% contribution rate. If you add on an additional 5%, we're talking about a 30% rate of contributions into your pensions. Auto enrollment as a piece of legislation has been a game changer in terms of engaging people to take charge of their own retirement planning needs, putting the onus on us, and ultimately, and more importantly, forcing companies to pay into a pension on behalf of their employees. And whilst this has been a good thing, if you have been paying attention to the numbers, auto enrollment in its current form doesn't actually meet the limits that we've just spoken about in terms of your pension contribution rates. So this is what auto enrollment essentially does. So if you're auto enrolled in your company pension right now, you as the employee will have to pay in 5% of your qualifying salary into a pension. And your employee, who is your boss essentially, the company that hires you, that pays your salary, has to pay in 3% per year. Now, if you add these two up, that's a total contribution of 8%. Now, if we just go back up here, if you're in your 20s, you need to be paying in roughly around about 10%, if we use that rule of thumb, into your pension. If you're in your 30s, 15%. If you're in your 40s, say you're 45, 22.5%. Now, auto enrollment doesn't get to those levels unless you have a matching scheme where ultimately your employer agrees to match the contributions that you make over and above the minimums required for you to contribute under auto enrollment. So just as an example, if you are currently paying 5%, because that is the minimum under auto enrollment. You say you'll increase that to 8%. Under matching, your boss may say, okay, I'm going to go from 3% and match you at 8%. Now that will give you a 16% pension contribution rate, which if we go back up to these numbers right here, gives you a better chance because they align more with the rule of thumb of what you should be contributing into your pension based on your age, particularly if you are 20, where you're over and above the 10%, but certainly over and above the 15%, which is the 5% buffer. And at 30 years old, you're also at that 15%. So you're giving yourself the best chance possible. The average UK wage is not conducive to anything that we've been speaking about so far in this video, particularly when it comes to the contribution rates that are suggested to give you the best chance of success. And it's worthwhile mentioning, these are the average UK wages for the age group. So clearly there are going to be outliers. You might work in a city where you're earning more. You might live in a small town or a village where you're earning less. So this is an average. But let's jump in, starting with if you're in your 20s. So the average wage, if you're in your 20s, is about £30,000. And when you take into consideration that you've got an 8% auto enrollment contribution into a pension if you opted in, that means that you're saving £2,400 a year or £200 a month. But when you think about the rule of thumb, in your 20s, the rule of thumb is 10 to 15% to give you the best chance of success. Suggests that you should be contributing between £3,000 and £4,500 into your pension a year. Now, if in your 30s, the average wage is about £40,000, which means that under auto enrollment is £3,200 a year or £267 a month. But again, using the rule of thumb, in your 30s, 15 to 20%, well, it suggests you should be contributing between £4,000 and £8,000 into your pension every year. If you're in your 40s, the average wage is about £50,000. So under auto enrollment, you're paying in £4,000 a year or £333 a month. But at 40, the suggestion is 20 to 25% of your annual wage, which is between £10,000 and £12,500 in your 50s. The average wage is still about £50,000, so the auto enrollment contribution is still the same, £4,000 a year or £333 a month. But in your 50s, the suggested contribution rate is between 25 and 30%, which means it is suggested you should be paying in £12,500 to £15,000 into your pension every single year for success. Now, this clearly paints the picture that we're not talking about small disparities in pension contributions in terms of it's only £100, £200, £1,000 maximum a year. We're talking about hundreds of pounds a month. And so in trying to bring this home around when is too late, we need to put some parameters on this. And the parameters that I'm going to put on this to really talk about what the probabilities are of success based on your age group, whether in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s, are as follows. Now, we are going to assume that you're retiring at the age of 60. We're going to assume that you need an income of £30,000 to live comfortably. We're assuming there is no state pension provision in this scenario. And because your money is invested in a pension, we're also going to assume that you are able to achieve a 5% return adjusted for inflation, and the inflation rate is at 2%. So these are the probabilities of success across the different age groups. Now, if you're in your 20s, you have a high probability of success between 70 and 80%, which is pretty good. And the reason for this is because you're starting earlier on that timeline. And what that means is that really your biggest asset is time. So starting early is really your gift. Yes, you need to maintain the contribution rate, but within this, and this is worthwhile noting, that the higher your contribution rate, the higher your probability of success is also going to be. Now, if you're in your 30s, you have a moderate chance of success, and this is ranked at 50 to 60%. Now, it's still completely feasible, but obviously you've lost 10 years on someone who started in their 20s. And an exercise that you can do to kind of figure out and quantify what that 10-year difference is in terms of monetary value is go onto a compound interest calculator and find out what you're paying into your pension right now, put that in, add another 10 years to it as if you're starting at 20. Trust me, the number will be absolutely astounding to you, because I've done this a number of times and it just makes you think, why didn't you start early? Now, if you're 40s, you still have a moderate chance of success, between 30 and 40%, but in your 40s, you require solid commitment. I mean, like real commitment to making sure that you're able to contribute at a higher rate. So we're talking in your 40s, 20 to 25% as the rule of thumb, and committing and making sure that you're able to do that. And if you're earning really, really well, perhaps using salary sacrifice, so on and so forth, because the reality is you have less time. You've only got 20 years and not 30 and 40 years for people who are, a decade and 2 decades younger. So you need a much, much higher level of commitment. Now, if you're in your 50s, you have a low probability of success, and this is rating it between 10 and 20%. And the reason for that is purely because of time. You've only got 10 years to do that. Now, in your 50s, a lot of people tend to they're taking their foot off the gas. If you're in this position, a lot of it is going to be really dependent on how much you can earn, how much income you can bring in, because that is directly going to have an impact on your contribution rate. And in your 50s, your contribution rate is going to have to be really, really high, even more so than if you're in your 40s. Now, it isn't to say that it's completely impossible, because, there is the potential really for you to perhaps, in addition to making sure that you are able to make a higher contribution. And look, in your 50s, you need to be contributing anywhere between 25 and 30%. In order for you to be in the best position possible, you're probably going to need to go between 45 and 55% contributions as a contribution rate into your pension to be at a chance of being able to retire comfortably. But aside from that, hopefully you've picked up assets as you've kind of gone through life, and you may have the ability to leverage assets, particularly if you have, buy-to-let investment properties, or even if you don't, maybe release the equity from your residential home. If the kids have all left home, to release equity for you to be able to use as a source of income. It becomes really, really difficult at this juncture in life. And if I were to answer this question, it almost feels like it would be too late if you are in your 50s, because the contribution rate will be so much higher. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. You've got to be really, really creative with how you're going to go about it, and you need to have a plan. And look, it's easy for us to sit here, or easy for me to sit here on a channel and spew out these numbers. But the reality is that, the best practice, and probably the best thing that anyone could do, is get a personalized view of what their retirement journey actually looks like. And I'm going to say something that is not going to be popular, because people just don't like this idea. But sitting down with a financial advisor in these kind of scenarios is just absolutely invaluable. Someone who can actually sit down, help you map this out properly with your personal circumstances, how much you have in assets, ISAs, your pension contributions, any previous pensions that you have, and really map out what that would look like. And in addition to that, actually do you a cash flow, so they can say, look, when you get to age 60, this is how much you have, and this is how much that money is going to last. It's not a popular thing to say, but there is so much value in doing it. And if I were to end this video, I'm just going to end this video with saying this: don't wait, and don't be sorry when it's too late for you to do anything about it.